welcome everybody. My name is Omar Dahi. We are recording this on September 29th on Sunday, a few days before the 1-year anniversary of October 7th. And I thought I'd ask some close colleagues and comrades and scholars to join me to reflect on a year of brutal genocidal assault by Israel on Palestine that is now expanding into Lebanon and elsewhere in the region. In fact, Yemen has been targeted as well. The first few weeks, maybe, there was a debate on how can we describe what's happening, the assault on Gaza, but I think it's hard to use any other term than genocide, given the tens of thousands of people that have been killed, which is probably a conservative estimate. There are estimates of maybe hundreds of thousands. The complete annihilation of infrastructure and means of survival in Gaza that is happening, the torture camps being run by Israel, the kind of verbal and rhetorical desire that is expressed routinely by various sectors within Israel of exterminating the Palestinians completely from existence. In the past few weeks, these attacks have escalated significantly to Lebanon, killing hundreds of people, hundreds of civilians, and displacing hundreds of thousands, perhaps more. They've also been accompanied by so-called targeted assassinations, which in fact have not been targeted, which have killed dozens of civilians and leveled densely populated areas, but which have also killed the top leadership of Hezbollah, including Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. This has all been done by immense and direct political, diplomatic, security, military support of the US and Western countries, who are now even salivating on the possibilities of reshaping the entire region, given the military success of Israel. And there are many threads to think about. There are many things to comment about, but also I think everyone is still processing a year of absolute annihilation and destruction and escalating shocks, one after the other. And the disconnect between what people in the region are experiencing and thinking about and the, I think it's safe to say, racist rhetoric that has been a cover for genocide that is emanating from Western circles. There's also been successes in confronting Israel and the genocidal attacks. I'm not even talking about kind of the resistance in the region. I'm talking about the global solidarity movements to hold Israel and the US accountable, movements to stop arms. We'll talk about and assess perhaps where this movement is and where can we identify any successes over this past year, because I think it's important to think about not just the defeats, but also the shifts in opinion about Israel, the shifts in the solidarity movement, the shifts in the rhetoric, as well as the international law being pursued to hold Israel accountable. So there's a lot to talk about. This is an informal discussion. This is, I asked my guests not to prepare, or I didn't ask them to prepare because, we can talk about many, many things, and we also can take this in many different directions. But I guess the first round, I'm going to ask them to give us their reactions as we now move into 1-year anniversary. And then in the second round, we'll talk a little bit more analysis of all the different threads that we can pick up. I'm going to start with Abdalhadi Alijla, who is a comrade and colleague and someone I've been reaching out to throughout the year, and who's written several articles and given commentaries, in particular to Security in Context, on what's happening, who has obviously a personal and political and various types of investments in Gaza. Abid, I'll give the first word to you to reflect on what's happening in Gaza over the past year and where things are now.
Thank you, Omar. And yes, 1 year, almost 1 year since the genocide started, but we know what happened during the year. However, what we reach is the point. In Gaza now, I will start with the in two things. One, in relation to the Israeli army and genocide in Gaza and the presence there, and then the internal Palestinian issues internally within Gaza. So now Gaza has been transformed completely into two concentration camps, northern Gaza and southern Gaza. Nothing enter and nothing leave, with the exception from Erez and Kerem Shalom in coordination with the United Arab Emirates. So now the United Arab Emirates are coordinating with the Israeli army who to leave and what to enter into Gaza Strip in terms of personnel or patients. Under many names, some people leave under the names of being patients, but they are really not patients. So there is no military resistance in northern Gaza because there hasn't been any Israeli presence within the cities. So because the whole resistance in Gaza has become now more guerrilla resistance. So in northern Gaza, sometimes Israeli invaded Beit Lahia in the very far north, sometimes in Zaytun area in the southern part of Gaza City. Israel is expanding also what they call it Netzarim corridor, which eating almost 4 kilometers in breadth from the Gaza Strip. It's a huge. So they are destroying every day dozens of homes and houses in Zaytun. So if we look, it's even worse than pre in 2005 Netzarim settlement there. They have took a big chunk of the land in southern Gaza, in southern Gaza City, but in South Gaza, the part like where most displaced people, almost 1.5 million or 0.6 million Palestinians there. There is a small scale of, let's say, resistance in Rafah area because there is Israeli presence along the Philadelphia corridor or Salah ad-Din corridor. Let's say it's with the Palestinian name, not the colonial name. It's called Salah ad-Din corridor. So the Palestinian resistance also fire some rockets on the Netzarim corridor or Salah ad-Din corridor daily basis. There is no Israeli presence on Gaza, with the exception of those two places. Attacks happens on daily basis from, of course, air jets, from the drones, killing between 15 to 30, sometimes 40, sometimes 50. It depends on the Israeli army willing to kill, how many they are willing to kill every day. And most of them, of course, civilians. The last targets of the Israeli military is schools in all Gaza Strip. They believe that if there is a Hamas member in this school, so it makes it a military target and a legitimate target. And usually they kill dozens along them, their families. And the Israeli now, I think they are putting their targets are whoever worked in Hamas civil administration as well. It's not only military targets, but it has become to teachers, principals, advocates, even thinkers who led NGOs, charity NGOs, faith-based organizations, even people, engineers who worked as in the Ministry of Economy, de facto Minister of Economy, Minister of Tourism for Hamas before 7 October. So this is the what seems from the Israeli side. Now, that's exactly what Netanyahu wanted. He wanted no international pressure in terms of Gaza. Now he controlling how it is there. The hostages like deal is not a priority for him, and that's what he wanted. He can control, he can expand corridor, he can continue the genocide because internally the genocide continues on a different scale. Now, people who are older than 80 years old in Gaza have been totally eliminated. Now, people who are over 75 are started to die, not naturally because there is no treatment, there is no way to provide healthcare services to them. So the number of people who are dying on daily basis actually a huge compared to if we compare it to previous years, and that means that the genocide of the healthcare system is part of the genocide in Gaza. When it comes to education, universities, have been totally destroyed. None of them is functional, so they turn to online, and some of them, but it's not exactly the same as having physical university. They are trying, but they're trying in different ways, but they are not successfully capturing the whole picture. That's how we can build. There's an ability to have a plan, clear plan on how to go forward on this, like taking or considering the scale of destruction. But in terms of primary schools, there have been many community initiatives in North and South, and kids have started to go to these schools on daily basis. This is good news in somehow in dark sense because that was one of the scariest moments that those kids lose 1 year for school or so. But now there is some community schools and almost every place or what they call it community or gathering in South and also in Northern Gaza started to resume education for children. So internally, in thinking when it comes to Gaza, the absence of Hamas de facto internal security, which Israel has been targeting as well, have created a security chaos in Gaza that some families, extended families, created some military groups, of course, with the help of Israel. And these families are the ones who have been historically, some of them were part of ISIS before, Jaish al-Islam, like Dokhmush family, or for example, some Shaybar family, for example, businessmen and so on. And others in southern Gaza has been also creating some, let's say, groups to not to protect their own community, but also to get advantages of how international aid goes in, how it's distributed. But this with the help of international organizations as well, because international organizations they have been reaching to them as well. I know in a few cases of these international organizations. The situation in Gaza is actually is dark. People, there is the genocide continues. There is no horizon how it will end. And considering what happens in Lebanon, now people don't know what is their future will look like.
Thank you. And that's really, the last points that you raised are really important. And I actually hadn't known as much about this, which is always something we need to consider, the international humanitarian sector, let's say humanitarian aid sector, and its role in these types of disasters, which is something I'd like to maybe talk about again if we have time. Jamil, I'll go to you. You're in Lebanon right now. Jamil Mouawad has last couple of days we spoke before, and we'll ask you a little bit about what's happening. But if you can give us some preliminary thoughts about what is actually taking place right now and your kind of general reactions to this escalation that's taking place in Lebanon.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Omar. Actually, as I was listening now, I was like confused about our role as social scientists, specifically in this very specific moment. Because now everyone in Lebanon is under the shock, right? And there is this reality, there is a vacuum that suddenly has been imposed on everyone, both politically, maybe ideologically for some, religiously for others, with the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. But also us as social scientists, we wonder what is our role now, specifically in a context where polarization is taking everyone by storm. So I'd like first to shed light a bit or talk or reflect on this moment of shock and how people are coping. I genuinely believe 2 days after the assassination that people don't have answers to what has happened, why Hezbollah couldn't really retaliate, how come that a personality like Hassan Nasrallah couldn't really protect himself. So one coping mechanism in the everyday life is that people are coming with a lot of rumors, stories, conspiracy theories. So this is their reaction to the shock, as if they're seeking a truth somewhere. They're seeking answers to what has happened. So they end up, coming up with all these stories. And I'm afraid some analysts also are falling into the trap of these, anecdotes, stories, rumors, call it whatever you want. So one of these rumors is that, for instance, Iran has sold out Hezbollah, for instance, or another one that Hezbollah anyway never had this infrastructure that could resist Israel. So they were only selling us fake hopes, for instance, or it was only a way for Hezbollah to control the Lebanese society. Amidst this vacuum, I cannot analyze what's going on because we don't have real information. And this is very important to bring here on the table. We don't know what is happening. We don't know what is going on. And therefore, from my own, position, I prefer to ask questions. Based on this shock moment, I believe sooner or later, the dust will clear in Lebanon. And the Pandora box will open. Who will take the lead after Nasrallah? This is one question. Will Hezbollah be one party, or would it be split in two parties, maybe pro-Iranian, pro-Syrians, I don't know what. So there are a lot of questions. And our role here maybe is to really ask all these questions. What would happen to the infrastructure of Hezbollah in terms of salaries, in terms of, all these institutions, social institutions, education? All these questions are on the table, and we don't have answers to these questions yet. And the only people who have answers to what happened now are those who are eager to declare the defeat of Hezbollah. So pro-Americans and maybe also pro-Israelis. And they also declare it, bluntly that, the Hezb is over, his role is over, and is now our role to jump in and under the guise of, sovereignty or bringing back the state in, or, building the state. And some even might, implicitly are not, explicitly are not saying it, but maybe some are eager to sign a peace treaty with Israel. And in this context, I would like to flag up the unusual tweet by Jared Kushner on, how are we moving forward? And in this tweet, he invites clearly his colleagues or his, partners in Lebanon to basically prepare for this moment where a peace would be signed with Israel. So all these questions are open, but we don't know how they will unfold. So there are many scenarios, and I'm not, predicting, I'm just asking questions, and no one, should be able to predict. But one question would be, there is a momentum, specifically if Trump will be elected soon, there is a momentum for peace. The question is, are the people of this region are still able to resist and, say no to this peace the same way they've said it before? Are they too exhausted after what happened in Syria, after what happened in Palestine, and after what is going on in Lebanon? Who will take the lead? Is this still possible? I remind you, and we all know this, the resistance itself is directly associated with the name of Hassan Nasrallah, and Hassan Nasrallah as a name is directly associated with the resistance. So there is this moment where we wonder what is the future, not only of Hezbollah, but of the resistance. Who are the forces that are able now to say no to a potential peace treaty with Israel, or normalization, or call it whatever you want? Because we know who are kind of, in favor of this, possible peace. You call it peace, normalization, or truth, or whatever. But who is not in favor? I wonder who is still able to say no and to resist in what shape or form. And this is also our role, to say no, that, in a sense, that this is maybe finally the piece, the puzzle is coming together, and we know why why everything happened in the region, because I have an answer to this, because Israel wants to live in peace, quote unquote, with complete impunity by destroying, Lebanon, Syria, and eventually, Palestine. So the question is now, the Lebanese society can survive this shock. Are we going to have yet another polarized and entrenched polarized society? And what are the channels? How are we going to channel this polarization? We all know that the parliament is not the place to do it. Are we going to have, this polarization unfolding in the street through, violence or not? We don't know. We know that there is polarization, but I wonder who are the groups that can really bring people together at this very specific moment. We've seen solidarity in recent days that transcends, sectarian or even political divides. Is it sustainable? Is it not? And who's going to benefit from this solidarity, to build on the solidarity? And who's going to, really try to hollow out the solidarity and bring up the tensions again in society? So we have to wait and see, because again, in this moment of shock, everything is uncertain and the possibilities are open.
Thank you, Jamil, and I'm glad you reminded us of what we should be thinking about and how we should be approaching it, given all this overdrive that saturates our lives of social media and rumors, and which, one starts to think that this is actually part and parcel of hegemonic design somehow, if you were to be conspiratorial of this, especially with kind of algorithms that skew kind of reactions in a certain way or another and make you think that, well, everything is heading in one direction. But I'd like to go to Mandy Turner, who is a scholar of peace and conflict and critical international relations, and who has also asked a lot of important questions and has the Arabic translation of your edited volume just came out. So congratulations on that. And it's, I think, aptly titled From the River to the Sea, or at least that's the title. And there's another subtitle, which I forget, which you can tell us. But you ask a lot of questions, and you also contextualize things, carefully studying the history and trajectory, and in order to kind of think about what we're going through. So maybe I'll go to you with some thoughts, either given kind of your previous work or kind of the things that you're doing on right now.
Thanks, Omar, and thanks to the other participants. It's very sobering to hear what's happening in Gaza and in Lebanon. Just came back from the West Bank. I was there for 5 weeks over the summer, so I'm going to make some comments on that as well. But just to come back to Omar's point about the book coming out, translated and published by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies in Doha. The subtitle is Palestine and Israel in the Shadow of Peace. And peace was in scare quotes, and obviously for a reason, because the only peace that we see is the peace that Israel was enjoying, the kind of peace that Jamil is outlining, that Palestinians should remain under Israeli control, under Israeli apartheid control, and that the rest of the region should accept Israel's position as a settler colonial apartheid state. Now, unfortunately, of course, it's bittersweet, because we're not in the shadow of peace anymore. We're in the shadow of genocide. And sitting here 1 year, coming up to 1 year since the genocide started, it's very sobering to try and take account of what we know and what we did know. I mean, even in that first week, after October the 7th, we knew what was happening. We knew from the first week after Hamas's attack that Israel was going to commit a genocide against the Palestinian people. Only a few days in, on I think it was October the 13th, we saw Raz Segal, the Holocaust and Genocide Studies professor, publishing the article in Jewish Currents, which said that what Israel was doing was a textbook case of genocide, and that Israeli leaders were being explicit and unashamed that they were intending to kill and starve and bomb Palestinians. And he finished up by saying, why isn't the world listening? Now, we know that this article was widely reported on in the media at the time. We also know that UN experts were also predicting widespread, intensification of violence by Israel that we hadn't seen before. Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur, was warning, I think it was the day after Segal's article, that public officials in Israel were openly calling for another Nakba. She also wrote that extensive study, Anatomy of a Genocide, in March, where she meticulously accounts what's taken place. And what's happened to Segal and Albanese, they've been attacked on social media. Segal's had a job offer rescinded. Albanese has been repeatedly attacked by American and Israeli politicians. We knew right from the beginning what was going to happen. We knew that this war against Palestinians this time was going to be epic in its violence. The world knew that Israel was going to carry out war crimes of immense proportions, and that these would only get worse. Israel's rampaging around the region, killing Palestinian, Iranian, and Lebanese political leaders, and America and the UK is bombing Yemen. We know this is not a conflict. This is a colonial war being fought by an occupier against an occupied people. We know who's supporting this war, and we know who's opposing it. Now, when I was in the West Bank, as I say, I was in the West Bank for 5 weeks over the summer. In fact, I flew in on the day that Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, which was an astonishing day to fly in. And Palestinian friends are very stoical, as Palestinians always are. But it was very dangerous to move around the West Bank. It was really difficult to move from city to city. People actually weren't moving around like they used to. People were reminding that this was like during the Second Intifada, where Israel was cutting off Palestinian areas and creating more road obstacles. And I just looked up today how many obstacles have been created since, and it's like there's been a 25% increase in road obstacles. And I witnessed some of them myself, where basically Israel has just dug up the road or put new checkpoints into areas. This has split areas off from each other. We know that the arrests of Palestinians in the West Bank has increased hugely since October the 7th. Israel's arrested nearly 11,000 Palestinians in the West Bank since October the 7th. We know that Israel is killing Palestinians. There's nearly 700 being killed in the West Bank since October the 7th by both Israeli forces and settlers. The World Health Organization reporting over 500 attacks on healthcare in the West Bank. We know about the households that have been displaced by Israeli settler violence. And this just goes on. I want to kind of finish by coming back to what Jamil made the point about what our role is as social scientists. Now, outside, I'm based in the UK, of course, where our government is complicit in this, is actively supporting Israel by sending weapons. We know that the British security forces are involved from Cyprus. There's investigative journalists that are already writing about this. It's my and our other social scientists in the UK to keep speaking out about what our government's doing, revealing what our government's doing, and trying to oppose what our government is doing to stop them supporting Israel. Now, this is an uphill battle, as we know, but we also know that there's what this is uncovering is the huge democratic deficit that exists both at the international level, in terms of the majority of member states of the UN want to see a ceasefire and want to see a Palestinian state, but a small minority of powerful states are blocking it. And what we see in most countries around the world, including America, Britain, and Germany, is the populations in these countries want to see a ceasefire and they want to see some form of justice for Palestinians. So I think what this is revealing is a huge democratic deficit globally and within the West. And I'll stop my comments with that.
Thank you so much, Mandy. I'll go to Sami Hermez next. Sami, I was reminded when Mandy mentioned the subtitle of her book, In the Shadow of Peace. The title of your first book was War is Coming, where you analyzed Lebanese society living in the anticipation or in the shadow of previous war and an anticipated war. And now we have actually war is no longer coming, it's actually here, and devastation is here. And you also recently just issued a book with Sirine Sawalha, My Brother, My Land, a story from Palestine, which talks about Palestinian resistance. So you've kind of reflected a lot on both struggle and resistance and war in the context of Palestine and Lebanon. And I guess I'll go to you next with some thoughts about what's going on.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you everyone for these really great comments and just the analysis. So I'm learning here. Yeah, I think what I'd want to say to that, first of all, on this issue of war is coming, I think one of the things is that there's all kinds of ways of living in this sort of war zone. First of all, you know, how you define that war zone, where that war zone, you know, is it a Palestinian Lebanese one, right? Versus I think it's important that we tend to see them as divorced from each other, but they're very much entangled. But even in Lebanon right now, I mean, I'm just thinking of like Jamil's experience versus someone's experience in Beirut, in a place that's being hit, or having to become a refugee, versus someone who's you know, kind of away. So people, I've been getting a lot of calls, as I'm sure some of you who are from Lebanon are probably getting similar like texts checking up on us, and it's interesting because, you know, I haven't checked up on my family. Maybe it's embarrassing to admit, but like I know where they live. I know where the bombs are falling at the moment, and that doesn't mean that they can't, you know, they won't escalate at any time soon. But there's just different ways of living within this war, and even, I mean, I imagine in Gaza, and how people are trying to kind of make little little spaces for themselves to be able to kind of survive. And you even see videos of someone like cooking meals, or kids playing because they're trying to you know, trying to get through these moments. I think the other thing that I'd want to say is that on this the Lebanese front, and sort of how I'm thinking about it, is that we're very much connected to what's happening in Palestine in the sense that Hezbollah began this in supporting Gaza on October 7 because it had to, right? I think there was not because there might be all kinds of political calculations, but just I think on the moral front, it had to, right? Forget all the other calculations and how it might be thinking. And that hasn't changed. It hasn't changed after the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. And it won't change. The moral issue still stands, and the moral issue, I think, is something that it's an important one. It's not something that it's not an afterthought, right? It can't be an afterthought because this is what sort of defines the struggle for over 75, 76 years. And so one of the things I think we were speaking earlier, but like you have these sort of normalizing states, or even Jamil said about like a peace treaty that people might be eyeing, the vultures are kind of eyeing this moment of weakness from Hezbollah to say, we need to advance like some kind of peace treaty. You can't make peace with settlers, right? It doesn't make sense and people committing a genocide. It doesn't make sense to, we didn't make peace with the Nazis, right? You don't make peace with actors such as this. You have to change. You have to either kind of remove that situation of injustice or change the mindsets of those people. And so I think, we're if we keep that in mind, then it's, for me, irrespective of the sort of gains that Israel makes by killing 1 or 2 or 10 leaders, this isn't something that's, Israel thinks it's going to go away because it kills a few leaders. It's not going to go away. And I think I wanted to maybe take the other end of this kind of equation that Jamil saying, how do we think of as social scientists, which is really apt given we're all social scientists. But I also wonder should we be thinking as social scientists, right? Is maybe the other part of this question. And should we, are these moments where we need to maybe use what we know as social scientists to build things, right? Build movements, build collectivities. So, I think there are two sides of the same coin. How do you think as a social scientist, but then what do you do with that knowledge? Which I think, we tend to, I think we get oftentimes stuck with that. And maybe the last thing I'll say is that part of me, and I think it's no secret to say that this feels the killing of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah is a kind of like a Jamal Abdel Nasser 1967 moment, right? But what happens after 1967, right? Between 1967 and 2024, what happens, right? And I think the successive resistance movements of the 70s that transformed in the 80s into Hezbollah, that grew and grew into something, is a history of struggle and lessons that you learn and gains that you make, that you are never starting from zero. So there's that kind of thinking of, it's a Jamal Abdel Nasser moment. It's a 1967 kind of boom, a hit. But at the same time, what emerges from that, not in a kind of, we need to feel strong and all, but just, reading history, right? Yeah. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Sami. And this is a really interesting question about our role as social scientists or not social scientists. One of the things that quotes I've been reading making the rounds on social media, I forget who said it, but in effect it says, beware intellectuals because they're the first ones to be defeated. This is by people who support the resistance. Like, the intellectual, the muthaqqaf, is the first one to declare defeat, the first one to be pessimistic. And what we need now is steadfastness and resilience and resistance. There's so many things to say about this. Obviously, it's a quote, it's a slogan to mobilize rather than a truth about the world and anything like that. So I'm not taking that way, but I'm also taking about the reality that colonial onslaught forces you into matters of life and death every minute of your life, where even expressing an opinion and thinking about your reality can be seen as submitting to it or not submitting to it. So we're constantly put in positions where the destruction that we're facing forces us into these zero-sum positions where we're even hesitating to think out loud about our reality because we don't want to submit to this onslaught and accept it. But at the same time, we have to find a space to think. So I think that's this existential crisis that we find ourselves in. But anyway, I want to go next to Bashir Saade, who has studied Hezbollah for many years and written a book about Hezbollah and the politics of remembrance. And I go to you, Bashir, because especially for those of us based in the West, we have heard and will hear so much nonsense, I guess, about Hezbollah from people who know very little of it. I understand people in Lebanon and people in the region have a different connection to it. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how the overwhelming majority of people who are going to be speaking about it in the West know very little. So I would ask you to maybe share your thoughts, but also, if you can, I know it's very difficult, but share with us, how do you understand Hezbollah's, let's say, past and trajectory and where it came from and what it is, in order to help us understand perhaps and make sense of what is happening. And maybe, you don't have to comment on this because it's all speculative, but maybe where things are going moving forward.
Thank you, Omar, for actually bringing us together. I think this is nice. I think we're all also under some kind of shock, as Jamil says, even for those who are outside Lebanon, probably a completely different kind of shock, but still a shock of being also away from maybe something we consider home also. But I'm gonna try to address what you've asked for. So before I start just talking about Hezbollah per se, or actually, okay, I'll start with thinking about what is Hezbollah in history up until today quickly, and so yeah, I mean, as many of us know, Hezbollah is born from Israeli occupation, just like Hamas is born out of Israeli occupation. It's as simple as that sometimes. So Hezbollah is born out of the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon, where Israel basically invaded all the way to Beirut. So it took over large chunks of the south of Lebanon, went into Beirut in order to dislodge Arafat, basically, and his organization. And we all know the story. There's Sabra and Shatila, the events of Sabra and Shatila, and then the subsequent withdrawal of Israel towards the basically the quarter of Lebanon, because it's basically they took over all the way to Saida and above Saida. So Saida was part of the occupation at first, but then with repeated operations against the Israeli forces, the Israelis withdrew from Saida. And it's about that time that Hezbollah actually announced its existence. So from the beginning, Hezbollah is basically for what we know later on, and it's very well described in Aurélie Daher's book, which I recommend to everyone. The beginning of Hezbollah is a merging of many people, including Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, into some kind of a new entity or a new group that is basically focused on resisting Israel's occupation. At the time, Hezbollah emerges from many different currents, some of them secular, some of them more Islamic oriented, and some of them not that focused really on militancy as such, but maybe on establishing things like an Islamic state or an Islamic society and all that. But Hezbollah per se, that group, these people, including Nasrallah and Abbas al-Musawi and Subhi al-Tufaili and others, were really basically their priority was the resistance. And they, from the beginning, this happened through, of course, Iranian help. The Revolutionary Guards of Iran came to the Baalbek region, and this is where the resistance started. And Hezbollah gained prominency like this because it was very effective at doing operations against Israel. They was highly disciplined, and they developed all sorts of institutions, not just the military one, around that institution, which included social services, social services in the larger sense of the term. And in 2000, I'm really shortcutting here, but in the year 2000, Israel withdraws from the south of Lebanon after repeated, attrition, if you want, or repeated guerrilla warfare against Israel. So this is one of this thing called Hezbollah is really the product of this experience of knowing that resistance can work, or that resistance can force, or actually a resistance also is the only thing that work in actually getting Israel to compromise or to withdraw from occupied land. And in 2006, there's another war in Lebanon that takes place, and this is one of the most interesting thing to be able to study maybe at some point where we have the clear space to do that, is to understand how different the war in 2006 was to the unfolding war, which is really, by the way, far from over, that is unfolding today. But in 2006, Israel, with American green light and some Arab states' green light also, was determined to neutralize Hezbollah. And in 2006, it failed miserably in doing nothing more than basically creating a humanitarian crisis of just, as a result of airstrikes and repeated bombing of the country, really. Anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that Hezbollah is really, when you say Hezbollah and you say the resistance or Israeli occupation, it's basically part and parcel of the same thing. Most of what Hezbollah is, for better or worse, is really an organization that has dedicated most of its objective to either prepare or fight, to prepare for a fight or actually fight the Israelis. To a certain extent, that it was criticized for that matter, that it wasn't taking more important roles in actually either building the country that is called Lebanon or otherwise. So this is just a bit of history. What else can I say? I just have a few points I can make on what happened in the last few weeks, and I think it's important to one of the things that really basically make me think something unprecedented had happened, or something really significant has happened, is that for a year Hezbollah has been adopting this measured strategy of trying to force Israel to stop the war in Gaza by saying we're creating this situation of insecurity in your northern regions, and it just spent this whole year doing this until it seems that the Israelis, for one reason or another, started actually actively confronting Hezbollah. But instead of confronting it where the battlefield is, it confronted somewhere completely different, which is it started just killing its leaders. And it successfully basically killed most of the top, the senior commanders of the organization, until also it reached Nasrallah, Sayyid Nasrallah himself. What it tells us is that it just reminds us, at least at this stage, the sheer asymmetry of the conflict that was reminded to us in Gaza already, that the technology of war of Israel / America, UK, etc., is so unfathomable compared to what Hamas can do or what Hezbollah can do, that it just puts so much perspective on the notion that Israel is defending itself, or it's defending an existential threat. And what they did with Hezbollah, just to take a last event, because they've been doing it in Gaza also, is in a few days really inflict a complete decapitation of the organization in Beirut through the most advanced forms of technologies they have. I mean, dropping 85 tons of missiles in the middle of the capital without anybody saying anything. And actually, while Netanyahu, who has an arrest warrant on his head, the Prime Minister of Israel, is actually allowed to talk to the United Nations. I mean, he's just, how can he enter the United Nations and speak like that? How was he allowed to speak? Even though, of course, a lot of people walked out, and that was very great to see. But how was he allowed to speak in the first place? And at the same time, order a strike that killed hundreds of people, including the leader of a prominent political party and organization. So there is definitely a complete. I mean, Mandy spoke about this really well. There's a collapse of the international order. I mean, of any kind of restraint on how the rules should be drawn, and it's a kind of reminder of the colonial nature of what's going on. So that Hezbollah and Hamas, as much as they try and do things, their goal is very small. Their goal is to just force an occupier to just compromise on that question of occupation, rather than this whole thing of, they want to kill everybody, or they want to. I think that the facts are louder than the actual words of that have been said. That so yeah, I just wanted to make that point. I think we're going to discuss a bit more things. Yeah. And sorry, the last thing you asked for is what's next. I think one thing to say, just very briefly, is it's really important to understand that Hezbollah is built on martyrdom. And I know this sounds cliche, like this could sound like a cliche sentence, but it actually has a very important practical implication, which is that when they say, when somebody is martyred, it's a form of victory. It in a way, the whole organization has been based on this principle. Most of its leaders have died. Nobody has died of an old age. I mean, I think nobody in Hezbollah has ever died of an old age. And most people who were there in the 80s have already died, have been either killed now, or have been, they've been assassinated or died in the battlefield. And yet Hezbollah continues. It continued after Abbas al-Musawi, who was killed in 92 by also an Israeli strike, along with all his family. And Nasrallah has always talked about the moment where he's going to die assassinated. It was almost like he was sure that this is what's going to happen. This is how things happen. And most of the organization is based on the memory of commanders rather than on the presence of these commanders. I think it's very important to understand how this works, even at the military level, at the motivational level, at the dedication level. It's sometimes a good question to ask how much the physical presence of the person, or just the aura of the person, is important for a cause to endure. Yeah.
Thank you, Bashir. That's very illuminating, and a lot of things that we could actually discuss more. But I think it's useful to think about where the group coming from and the origins, and it's kind of the social and political conditions that created it actually, and how it operates. And I think that the subtitle of your book is The Politics of Remembrance, and how it operates in its mobilization and its way of doing things is key. There are many things to say. I invite you to comment on any thread that has been put on the table, or any thoughts that you have. But one thing I keep thinking about in this last year, though, is how so many, one of the issues was the fact that Israel was willing to wage total war and is thinking about total war. And that restraint, because the resistance was wary of this thing called total war, restrained itself to a degree that was turned against it in a way that gave Israel the time to do what it did. And I keep thinking about that because several weeks ago, our colleague Tariq Dana tweeted a very key thing, which he said that total war is a psychological ruse, that we put it out there as something to justify all sorts of things like total destruction of Gaza. So we're not going to, we don't want to go to total war because things might escalate, but meanwhile a genocide happens. Or the people in the South, I mean, Jamil pointed this out many times, that we talk about, oh, the people in the South will not be going to school, but like as if part of Lebanon is okay that it's evacuated, and that's not total war, right? So this idea that there's a total war, of course, this is not to say that things cannot escalate and we cannot have a regional war, but this notion of a total war has been used and is used in a way to prevent kind of people reacting to what is happening, but also to justify all sorts of annihilatory policies, while the West gives itself the right to actually wage this total war. This is not fully formed ideas in my mind, but I think it's kind of clear to pick up a lot of these threads together. So I had a question about, a lot of you talked about, I mean, obviously we don't know where things are happening, where things are going, but I think at any moment it's also important to look at the social forces. What are the social forces? How are they pushing towards it in terms of the states, in terms of, within the region that's exhausted? Abid, I'll come back to you perhaps and maybe ask you a little bit more, because you mentioned like UAE's role in Gaza that is increasing in terms of logistics and humanitarian assistance, or perhaps other forms of presence. Can you tell us what are the main actors right now in Gaza that are trying to shape the future? Who is on the ground? How is that, the politics of that? How is it evolving? And then maybe if other people have comments about any of these topics that were mentioned, we can go from there.
I can categorize them to three, the actors, the three. The first is the United Arab Emirates and Jordan, and those who are engaged directly with the Israelis. They talk directly, coordinate directly with the Israelis under the humanitarian aid or healthcare provision, and so on. But most of the United Arab Emirates is in the southern of Gaza, and Jordan northern part of Gaza, because they come from areas, while the Emirates come from Kerem Shalom, Kerem Abu Salim crossing. However, the Jordanians, they have their base, they have their hospital in northern Gaza. And I think they come and go, they don't distribute food or aids or something. But the Emirate, on the other hand, they don't do like Jordanians don't coordinate with the Israelis to let people out, but the Emirates, they do more. They have direct hotline with the Israelis. They can in 24 hours or 48 hours get out somebody from Gaza. And this is something new for Gazans. But they don't interact directly with the people. There are some people, some Emiratis came to Gaza. Of course, they wanted to imitate the humanitarian aid and the Minister of International Aid of Qatar before. But the people in Gaza have accused them of being spies, Israeli spies, collecting informations in Gaza. And that's one. The second category are the Egyptians and Qataris. They are engaged politically. Qatar has stopped sending aid after the closure of Rafah because they used to coordinate with the Egyptians, and the Egyptians get also credits for that when they coordinate with the Qataris and so on. But so far, they don't. They are just politically engaged with the deal and talks and so on. How much on the ground, they are not. The third level is the Palestinian Authority, and they don't do anything. Right now, the Palestinian Authority in the beginning, the Palestinian intelligence tried to send a few dozens officers to northern Gaza, and then Hamas killed a few of Israel killed a few of them, and Hamas internal police in South Gaza arrested a few. So they just send some, they don't send, but they deposit part of salaries of people who, teachers, civil administrators in Gaza, who working or not working, part of their salaries. The third or the fourth people are the normal people, like the international organizations, families, and actors. So these are the actors in Gaza. Security-wise, nobody is there. Hamas is trying from time to time to form groups of people under the name of families and so on, but things are not as rosy as they wish.
Thanks, Abid. Mandy, you had a comment about the so-called rules-based international order. And I'm reminded of that when I think about how within the first 3 months of the Syrian war, from March, April, June, July till August, the European Union and the United States had applied the full sense of sanctions against Syria. And in fact, the European Union, it was unprecedented in its history to go from 0 to the full maximum within, and usually there's a gradualism. If any other country had done what Israel has been doing, or 5% of what's been doing, it would have faced the absolute maximum sanctions in ways that might destroy its economy. But we've seen actually the opposite happen in the case of Israel. But anyway, you had something more eloquent to say, I'm sure, about the rules-based order.
I don't know if it's more eloquent, but it definitely dovetails with what you said about the sanctions against Syria. I mean, I think it increasingly irritates me when I see these constant articles about the rules-based international order being, at the end of its life, because it's never actually applied equally right from the get-go. If we think about the rules-based international order in terms of peace and conflict, we think about the human rights law, the laws of war, and the UN as a mechanism for conflict resolution. Now, we know that for both of these aspects, they've only ever applied to those who are not powerful. We only need to look at the 1950s and 1960s. America, France, Britain has assassinated leaders in Africa and Latin America and the Middle East, America's wars in Southeast Asia, France's war in Algeria, the wars, the global war on terror that America has wrought. These are all issues, or these are all aspects of war crimes that America, Britain, and France have never been held accountable for. So, the third world approaches to international law scholars have obviously done us a great service by unpicking and unpacking how the so-called rules-based order operates. Now, I have the utmost respect for international lawyers who are trying through the ICC through the International Criminal Court and through the International Court of Justice to try to hold Israel accountable. And I think they should continue to do that. And I think we should continue to hold our governments accountable through things like arms trade regulation, laws, etc. However, let's not be under any illusions on what the international rules-based order has meant for those who are not the most powerful. It's usually meant African leaders being pulled in front of the ICC. It's meant, as you outlined, Omar, Syria being subject to sanctions that we have never seen being applied so quickly. Same with Russia. Same what we saw with Iraq after the first Gulf War. So we need to bear that in mind when we use these terms, which seems to imply that there's a level playing field, and we know that there's not a level playing field.
Since we're running up against the hour, I'll take the next comments as your last words or your last thoughts before we wrap up. And I'll go to Bashir next because you had some thoughts on this issue of total war.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I think this is also speculative, of course, but I think because I've been reflecting on what happened in 2006 and now, and looking at what happened in Gaza, and I think what the Israelis are trying to do is maybe avoid having to go, as in a ground invasion, because they're trying to, in a sense, neutralize or so-called neutralize Hezbollah in a way that they don't need to. They will try to avoid doing going on the ground like in Gaza, because it was so costly for them there, and because it's still in this situation of indeterminacy. I mean, in Gaza, they weren't able to achieve any of their political objectives, at least, or military objectives. And then, and because in Lebanon you don't have this hostage issue, and you don't have. So what I'm trying to say is, I think one of the things that happened over the year or so is that Israel has been gathering intelligence in a way that it has never done. It probably has done it for years, and it has been waiting for the right moment, but it was not very sure of what Hezbollah was going to do or what Iran was going to do. And I think this year what they did was just let Hezbollah act in a certain way and see what Iran would be doing if this and this and that will happen, and probably has judged that, okay, well, this is their ceiling, or more or less we can manage this, so let's go full force on trying to destroy the infrastructure of the organization, which is why, in a sense, it is possible that the war is going to stay as such, at least in the case of Lebanon, at least. But who knows? I mean, yeah, I just wanted to make this comment. It's a bit disconnected from what the other topics were, but just because you mentioned the question of total war.
Thank you, Bashir. Jamil?
Yeah, actually, just to build up on what Bashir just said, and you, Omar, I really like your comment about this total war, but I still believe that there was on the other side also kind of a total resistance kind of approach that, we're going to aim high. This time Israel is going to pay the price. So there were a lot of expectations, and, it's one thing to have high expectations, high hope. And, you might want to go very far and say we want to eradicate Israel and hit Tel Aviv, and it's another thing to say we are a resistance and we're defending the land. So, and I believe we have to think about what kind of resistance movement do we still want in this region, at least after what has happened now with Gaza, Lebanon. And this takes me back to your point on who are the actors. I mean, we all know that in Lebanon, at least from the Lebanese perspective, there is a vacuum, institutional vacuum, leadership vacuum, and now we have a resistance vacuum, at least now in the foreseen future. So how do we really build a society that can still resist Israel? At least, what kind of political system are we gonna, aim at? So these are questions that are as important as thinking about the military resistance. I mean, there is another aspect of the resistance that we have to think about that should not be reduced only to Hezbollah as a political party or as a resistance movement. There is a whole society that we should think about how do we shape the society in a way that, and same applies in Palestine, and same applies in Gaza and the West Bank and in the region altogether. Because let's admit it, Israel is technologically very advanced, and the war has changed, and that's why what happened has happened recently. So we really want to think, what societies do we want, what political system maybe we want, and what place this military resistance should take in this political system or in this society. Because I agree with Bashir that Hezbollah focused a lot on, same for Hamas, maybe on the military aspect, but they had intentionally or not blocked lot of internal dynamics, in order maybe to reinforce the state institution, maybe to some other economic aspects, specifically after what happened in Lebanon in 2019. So it's time to have this holistic approach to the concept of resistance instead of just restricting it to the military aspect. And my fear is that we're not doing this exercise, and we should undertake this exercise collectively.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamil. And I hope and I see that a lot of our projects and security in context and a lot of the discussions we're having are part of this thinking out loud, that we can create a space that's on our terms, not on terms of the West that already kind of ontologically sees us as non-entities or as subhuman. But what kind of project can we think about? Not to say that it has to be an alternative to military resistance, of course, but especially given the fact that Israel, I mean, one of the things I think about is kind of Israeli propaganda about Arabs and Palestinians that actually applies to actually Israel and Israeli society, which is that Arabs only understand the language of force, and we've seen historically that Israel only understands the language of force. In fact, their only defeats are when they were driven out. But that was when Hezbollah was fighting over Lebanese land and in their relatively in their comfort zone and on their terms as well. Anyway, there's a lot more to say, but I thank you for that, and I think that's really important. Sami, maybe some last thoughts.
I actually will pick up on where Jamil left off, and just thinking that in terms of how we need to think about resistance holistically. I think the armed resistance is fundamental to resistance as a whole, and I think one thing is for sure there are going to be but for sure there's going to be major changes in the region in terms of sort of shifts, because Nasrallah held such a huge sort of space in the regional geopolitics, and so his absence will surely, it's going to rattle things up, even if Hezbollah tomorrow have a new leader, even if he's a strong leader, it's going to be there's still going to be some major shifts. But I think that so one aspect is this armed resistance will continue, should continue, whatever, all these things. But I think in the new sort of moving forward, there will also need to be thinking about how do we infiltrate. They infiltrate us, but how do we infiltrate them, right? How do we infiltrate Israeli society, security establishment, et cetera, et cetera. But also the other aspect of this is how do you work at a kind of, if thinking about total resistance, is how do you change and work on the minds, right? They're trying to normalize colonialism. They're trying to normalize defeat. They're trying to, I think, also normalize this idea that resistance is futile, right? This was the whole project in Gaza, is resistance is futile. Don't bother trying it. And what we saw these last 2 weeks is one of those moments. Don't try. But I think we also need to kind of normalize, along with sort of a global movement and sort of in some sort of synergies is to normalize anti-colonialism, to normalize anti-Zionism, to work on the mind of the Zionists alongside the pressure and the insecurity that you're causing and so on, but also to work on their mind to change some of that. So I think, Jamil's point of resistance more holistically, you need to think about these other aspects without, of course, the arms resistance is going to go on with or without us, whether we care about it or don't, or support it or not, or fight it or not. It's going to go on. So
this has been, really important for us to get together and think out loud. So I really appreciate you coming on very short notice. I know a lot of this stuff is already in your thoughts and consumes your every moment, and many of you are in the midst of all of this directly. So hope you're safe, hope you're well, and hope we can do this again. I really learned a lot from all of you. Thank you guys so much.